Okay, so how it works on a day-to-day basis is that the teams in each country we're always looking at the news stories and thinking what news stories might act as what we call discourse triggers for potentially anti-Semitic speech, right? So any news stories that come up or things that are getting spoken about, we mark them down, and then we try and collect relevant corpora, the comments to be analysed for each of those stories. So some examples over the last year: the Russian invasion of Ukraine, various flashpoints in the Middle East conflict, the whole David Miller case in the UK. I don't know if you're aware of that, but that was a real shocker, hardcore anti-Semite, big thing, big protest about him. So coverage of that. There were some trials of former concentration camp employees in Germany last year, I think, that we looked at. COVID protests in France around the health pass and the kind of anti-Semitism there. The boycott of Israeli publishers by the Irish author Sally Rooney. So we collect all the news stories, and then we use this thing called a crawler, which then goes online and downloads all of the comments that are on there.
And it's a preemptive form of what I call preemptive metadiscrimination. Preemptive metadiscrimination is a kind of discrimination that ensues not by saying you're hateful and beastly or whatever. It's you portray the other person as being the hater, right? And therefore, victim status can't be attributed to the person who is hateful. They're the powerful person who's hateful. Victim status doesn't apply. That's a scheme. That's a preemptive attack against them being able to be perceived as victims, because they're the preemptivity is that they themselves are kind of like the power brokers who are responsible for things. Thus, victim status doesn't apply. So that kind of strategy appears to be a widespread one, and this is not some extremist network. This is across the entirety of Twitter that we're able to see this. So that's really shocking, and it probably leaves Jews really vulnerable, would be my guess. The other thing we can do when this happens is we can do network analysis to understand how the most prominent users are gaining user share in the ecosystem of attention. So this is an interactive network of the top users who disseminated the words apartheid, Israel, Zionism, etc. during the release of the report in the days shortly after. And what we find is that most of the conversation is being driven by the blue here, and that blue is all Amnesty International. There are a few exceptions: Chantal Brown, Richie Torres, and Mike Pompeo. So the thing about this is that while Amnesty and some of its most closely associated influencers are by and large dominating the conversation, we can see that the people who are really effective at getting through are actually and defending Israel are not Israelis, and they're not Jews.
We hired a Miami-based firm, and I want to share with you what we found. In terms of content of anti-Semitism, when we look at the content that's out there, the bulk of it, when we tested it amongst those 98 non-Jews, and I'm talking about Americans, did not resonate with them. We received a lot of feedback on why, and it's very important feedback because it breaks away from the traditional forms of communicating through media about anti-Semitism and Jews. Their perceptions of the world, their worldviews are very different. How they consume media is very different. Doing this 15 years, we have to now shift how we communicate and how we frame these issues because of the worldview of the audiences that we're trying to engage and target. And what we found is that there's content that is to talk about anti-Semitism and the Holocaust and Israel that resonates with Jews. And then there needs to be content, because there is very much a lack of, to talk to young non-Jewish Americans about the Holocaust, Israel, and Jews. And we were able to gauge effectiveness of speakers. We were able to gauge effectiveness of content. We not only showed content about the Holocaust and anti-Semitism that is produced from non-Jewish organizations. From Jewish organizations, but we also showed content that's being produced from some of the providers of disinformation that they're putting out there. And we wanted to see what is more persuasive, what is more effective in educating these young audiences, and then how can we take the lessons of what works and what doesn't, particularly what works, and apply it now moving forward in the communications sphere to be able to communicate a better message about Israel, anti-Semitism, and the Jewish community.